In December 1978, a series of unexplainable events took place off the east coast of New Zealand's South Island. Still considered some of the best and most credible footage ever captured of an unidentified flying object, the film taken by a national network news team from the cockpit window of an Argosy cargo plane made headlines all around the world. What made the sightings even more bizarre was that they were captured on air traffic control radar too. This is the story of the Kaikoura Lights Incident. This week I thought I'd do something a little different. I would say I'm neither a believer in UFO sightings nor a disbeliever. I don't have any opinion on them. All I know is that I haven't seen one myself. However, the story of the Kaikoura Lights as it's known, I did find quite interesting, and it's certainly something you hear a lot about growing up in New Zealand. And believe it or not, the story starts where I grew up, in Blenheim. So I thought I'd share the story. In the late hours of December 20th, 1978, Warrant Officer Ian Uffindell of the Royal New Zealand Air Force was completing his final security checks before signing off at Woodburn Air Force Base near Blenheim. Catching his eye out east toward the coast was what he initially thought to be landing lights of an aircraft coming in to land. This struck him as odd. At 11:30 PM at night, there should have been no aircraft in the area, and if there was, he would have known about it. Uffindell contacted the local air traffic controller. Unaware of aircraft in the vicinity, he was equally bewildered, but suggested to Uffindell it could be the landing lights of an aeroplane approaching Wellington around 80 miles or 130 kilometers to the north. Although this seemed like a likely explanation, upon contacting the New Zealand Central Air Traffic Control Tower in Wellington, radar operator John Cordy advised them there was no aircraft in the vicinity, but astonishingly, he reported he had unidentified blips showing on his air traffic control radar.
They would describe a light that they could see that would be moving north over the hills beyond Blenheim, and we would see coincidentally a target on our radar that was also moving north at the same time, and made us think that perhaps these things were related to each other.
Meanwhile, at Blenheim, just a few miles east of Woodburn Air Force Base, police were being inundated with calls from locals reporting strange lights in the night sky out east towards the coast. As baffling as the mystery was, it would only get more strange from here on out. At around 2:30 AM, an Armstrong Whitworth Argosy freighter was en route from Wellington to Christchurch on a routine newspaper delivery run. Captain Vern Powell and First Officer Ian Perry had been informed by air traffic control in Wellington of the unusual lights and the radar anomalies in the vicinity earlier. While the initial stages of the flight were uneventful, at around 3 AM as the aircraft tracked along the Kaikoura coast, roughly 60 miles southeast of Blenheim, Captain Powell radioed air traffic control in Wellington to report a series of large flashing lights following alongside his aircraft.
Popped out of this cloud, and here was this light, but so close that it was almost frightening. You know, what the hang is that?
Do we have a bright red glowing light out to our 10 o'clock position? Hard to say what range it is, but it's definitely airborne.
Like the earlier incident a few hours before, the objects appeared on air traffic control radar in Wellington and the aircraft's own onboard radar. The lights followed the aircraft for 40 miles before the plane made its eventual touchdown at Christchurch. It had been an eventful night, but the mystery would only get deeper. However, the next time the lights appeared, a major network news film crew would be on hand to capture it. The incident from the night before had made headlines in all the major newspapers across New Zealand and would quickly make the news in Australia too. In fact, it would pique the interest of one of Australia's largest news networks, then known as Channel Zero, now Network 10, owned by Paramount Global. Australia had had its own UFO story just 2 months prior, and public interest was at an all-time high. On October the 21st, 1978, 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentich disappeared while flying a Cessna 182 over the Bass Strait. While flying out over the ocean, Valentich radioed air traffic control to report an unidentified aircraft was following him. He claimed 4 bright lights were flying around him and, at some points, below or above. A short, panicked conversation with air traffic control ended with Valentich's final transmission, stating, "That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." Followed by 17 seconds of open mic, before presumably the Cessna crashed into the ocean. An exhaustive search by authorities failed to ever find Valentich or the Cessna. The Frederick Valentich story is the subject of numerous YouTube videos and continues to intrigue to this day. Interestingly, while his aircraft was never recovered, in 1983 an engine cowl flap washed ashore. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau concluded it came from a Cessna 182 between a specific range of serial numbers, including that of the one flying that fateful night. However, in 1978, the Australian public was gripped by the ordeal. So when the New Zealand incident happened just 2 months later, Channel Zero sent a team to investigate, but they would get much more than they bargained for. A Channel Zero news team led by renowned Australian television reporter Quentin Fogarty was sent to Wellington to cover the event. Although it would be the same route but different pilots, network bosses in Australia had arranged for Fogarty and his team to go up in the Argosy on a nighttime mail run to film the location where the sightings had happened.
Thought the job would be interesting. It was a good story. We were following up a strong UFO sighting. I had an interest in that. But I didn't for 1 second even begin to imagine that we would get involved in something ourselves.
Around half an hour into the flight, as the plane tracked along the Kaikoura coast towards Christchurch, Fogarty and his crew heard an urgent call to get up onto the flight deck.
The very first thing we saw was these sort of balls of light that would just appear in the sky. And I mean, it was really just looking through small windows at a very, very black sky and seeing pulsating lights that started usually as a very, very small pinprick of light and then would glow into a great globe of light.
And just like the week before, whatever it was showing on air traffic control radar.
The people in the aeroplane were seeing lights in the sky where the radar was reporting. There was the same correlation between radar target and nocturnal light.
The lights followed the aircraft for around 15 minutes. The plane landed safely in Christchurch before taking off again for the return journey. The following day, the news media went into a frenzy. The event and subsequent footage taken on board that night made world headlines not only in New Zealand, but right across the world. Interest had been piqued by the fact that not only had the objects appeared on air traffic control radar, but a credible and reliable source had shot the footage. Even to this day, many consider the footage and the events of that night to be one of the best and hardest to explain unidentified flying object sightings ever. The Royal New Zealand Air Force and the New Zealand Police were tasked with investigating the event. The New Zealand Ministry of Defence returned with a public report that attributed the events to lights from a squid boat reflecting off the clouds, or another natural but unusual phenomenon like Venus, atmospheric conditions, a meteor, or even lights from cars or trains. Royal New Zealand Air Force Warrant Officer Ian Uffindell, who had first witnessed the lights over Woodburn Military Base on December 20th, had this to say: "It is my opinion that this inquiry was a farce from the beginning. Whilst the committee was comprised of men with high degrees of intelligence and scientific background, I believe they were all biased towards the type of findings they arrived at before they even commenced the inquiry."
I know what the sky is all about. I know an aeroplane when I see it. I know a meteor when I see it. I know a star or a planet when I see it. And what we saw that night was none of those things.
As for showing on air traffic control radar, the report simply put it down to faults with the radar itself, or bizarrely, moonlight reflecting off a cabbage field.
Certainly wasn't a squid boat. I never seen one on 13,000 feet up in the air anyway. Venus hadn't risen, so I don't know what it was.
The aircrew could have seen the light reflected from cabbages, but I've never known cabbages reflect on a radar screen before. And certainly, I'd like to know who was growing cabbages 20 miles out to the southeast of Wellington, well over the sea.
I know what Venus looks like, I know what planets look like and stars look like, and it was definitely none of those things.
Declassified military documents from 1978, released under the Official Informations Act in 2010, stated that the sightings were unique because of a large amount of documented evidence, which included countless eyewitnesses, 2 tape recordings, and the detection of unusual ground and aircraft radar targets. Whether its origins are a rational earthly explanation or something more difficult to explain, the Kaikoura Lights Incident remains one of the most intriguing and unexplainable unidentified flying object encounters ever. Let me know in the comments section what you think it could have been, and for any New Zealanders watching, have you got your own story from that night? And as always, thanks for watching.